Today, I want to tell you a story. It's a story about something really small, but it's more important than almost anything else in the entire world. You see, it's a story about a fire. A fire that's burning right now. And no, I'm not just being poetic here. I'm talking about a real, actual biological fire. It's happening inside every single one of your cells as we speak. Okay, get this. You have something like 37 trillion cells in your body. And inside each one is a tiny little power plant called the mitochondrion. And that's where it's all happening. A constant, controlled burn. It is literally the fire of life. When that fire burns bright, you feel amazing, you feel energized. When it starts to dwindle, you feel tired. And, well, when it goes out, life ends. And there was one man, a brilliant German scientist, who dedicated pretty much his entire life to understanding this fire. His name was Otto Warburg. And our story with him, well, it kicks off at a very specific time and a very specific place. I want you to picture it. Snow is falling outside a lab window. There's a 40-year-old man in a white coat, and he is hunched over a microscope, just staring at this tiny little tissue sample. That man is Otto Warburg, and he has just seen something so strange, so out there, he has to check his results 3 times over. The cancer tissue on his slide was gobbling up sugar 70 times faster than a normal, healthy tissue sample. 70. This was not a mistake. This was a mystery, and Otto Warburg would spend the next 40 years of his life trying to solve it. So who was this guy? Well, Otto Warburg was no ordinary scientist, let me tell you. He earned 2 PhDs, one in chemistry and another one in medicine. During World War I, he was a cavalry officer right there on the front lines, until he got a letter from Albert Einstein himself, basically begging him to come home, because, as Einstein put it, science needed him. And this is the wildest part, despite his Jewish heritage, he stayed in Berlin and somehow survived the entire Nazi regime, possibly because Hitler himself was terrified of cancer and believed Warburg was his best shot at finding a cure. Okay, let's get back to that lab in 1923. Warburg was totally obsessed with one simple question. Do cancer cells breathe differently than normal cells? Now, breathing for a cell just means using oxygen to create energy. You know, just like us, our cells need to take in oxygen to function properly. They use that oxygen to burn fuel, like sugar, in a really clean and efficient way to generate power. That whole process, it's called cellular respiration. Now, here's the rule that pretty much all cells are supposed to follow. If there's plenty of oxygen, they use it. It's super efficient, like a modern power plant. It's only when oxygen is scarce that they switch to this messy, inefficient backup plan called fermentation, which creates all this lactic acid. Think of it like a rusty old coal furnace belching out smoke. But what Warburg discovered was that cancer cells, they break this rule. Even with tons of oxygen available, they choose to use the dirty, inefficient furnace. They just ferment sugar like crazy. The massive question was, why? This one observation led Warburg to a bold, totally radical hypothesis that would cause a storm of controversy for nearly a century. So, this is the crucial part. Warburg believed cancer didn't start with a genetic mutation. Nope. He argued that it all started with damaged respiration. He thought that if a cell's mitochondria, its power plants, were damaged by toxins or just a chronic lack of oxygen, the cell would be forced to switch to that messy fermentation just to survive. He believed that this switch was the first irreversible step on the road to cancer. And this wasn't just some theory for him, it was a way of life. Warburg was absolutely obsessed with avoiding cancer. He grew his own organic vegetables, drank water from an unpolluted well, and he avoided any toxins he believed could damage his mitochondria. He genuinely believed that a whopping 80% of cancers could be prevented simply by keeping our cellular environment healthy and full of oxygen. And this conviction, this work, it's what earned him a Nobel Prize back in 1931. So the big question is, was he right? Well, it turns out modern science tells us he was both brilliantly right and fundamentally wrong. He was right that the Warburg Effect is a very real thing. So real, in fact, that it's the principle behind the PET scans we use today to detect cancer. And he was absolutely right that oxygen is vital for cellular health. But he was wrong about the cause. The mitochondria and cancer cells, they aren't broken. The Warburg Effect isn't the cause of cancer, it's a consequence of the genetic mutations that are the real root of the disease. But maybe the most important lesson from Warburg's entire life's work wasn't really about cause or effect. It was something much, much simpler. And this is where our story takes a fascinating turn, from a lab in Berlin to the highest mountains on Earth. Thousands of years before Warburg was even born, mystics who were meditating deep in the Himalayas, they came to a very similar conclusion. In his lab, Warburg declared that cells need oxygen. Through deep introspection, the ancient masters declared that the body needs a vital, invisible energy they called Sin-Ki, an ancient term for what they thought of as the body's life force. And how did they believe you could increase this life force within you? Not with fancy machines or chemicals, but with something incredibly simple: deep, intentional breathing. It raises a pretty fascinating question, doesn't it? Is this ancient concept of life force just another word for the oxygen that Otto Warburg dedicated his life to studying? The connection between our breath and the health of our 37 trillion cells is a deep one, and it's something worth exploring a whole lot more. Until then, just remember that every single breath you take is feeding those tiny fires within you. So why not breathe a little deeper? The fire's waiting,